Your great-grandma once baked an apple pie with 0 apples in it. None. She boiled plain crackers in lemon and sugar, poured it into a crust, and her whole family swore it tasted like the real deal. But that pie is just the start, because for hundreds of years, broke and hungry people got scary good at faking the food they couldn't afford. They faked meat, they faked lobster, they even faked honey. And some of these tricks were so good, we're still eating the fakes today without knowing it. So let's count down 10 of them. First up at number 10 is the mock apple pie. This one goes back way further than people think. Everybody loves to blame the Great Depression for it, but cooks were already faking apple pie back in the 1850s, decades before the stock market ever crashed. It even showed up in a Southern cookbook during the Civil War, back when the crackers were the plain hard kind soldiers lived on. The method was almost too simple. You took cheap crackers, boiled them in water with sugar, lemon juice, and a heavy hit of cinnamon, then dumped the whole soggy mess into a pie crust. As it baked, those crackers fell apart into soft little chunks that looked and even chewed like stewed apples. But the strangest part happens inside your mouth. There's no fruit anywhere in that pie, yet your brain still tastes apple, because the lemon brings the sourness, the cinnamon brings the smell, and your mind quietly fills in the gap. Years later, the Ritz Cracker Company started printing the recipe right on the back of the box during the war, and millions of families happily ate it up. But there's a twist nobody saw coming. By the time your grandma was baking it in the 60s, a box of crackers cost more than a bag of real apples, so the money saver had quietly turned it into something people only baked for the memories. The fake outlived the whole reason it was born. And if faking a piece of fruit sounds wild, wait until you see what they did with nothing but water. Hunger like that takes us to number 9, the water pie. This is exactly what it sounds like. And it might be the saddest, smartest dessert ever made. When the cupboard was bare, no milk, no eggs, no fruit, people still found a way to put something sweet on the table using almost nothing. You'd line a crust, pour in plain water, then sprinkle flour, sugar, a little butter, and a splash of vanilla right on top. You didn't even stir it. Into the oven it went, and as it baked, all those bits slowly thickened the water into a soft, golden custard that wobbled like the real thing. The earliest version I could track down ran in a California newspaper back in 1886, and it literally called itself a good substitute for custard pie when milk is scarce. So this trick is way older than the breadlines of the 30s, even though that's when it really caught on. But the modern twist is even stranger. That same water pie went viral again a few years back. Except younger cooks swapped the plain water for lemon lime soda and started calling it Sprite pie. With no clue they were rebaking a survival recipe their great-grandparents leaned on to feed their kids. The desperation got forgotten, but the pie kept going. And speaking of faking flavor out of almost nothing, the next one fooled people into thinking they were eating fresh lemons. Things turned sour at number 8, the vinegar pie. Fresh lemons used to be a luxury that most country families simply couldn't get, especially deep in winter or way out in the middle of nowhere. So instead of giving up on that bright, tangy lemon pie everyone loved, they reached for the one sharp thing they always had in the pantry, plain apple cider vinegar. They'd whisk it together with sugar, flour, an egg, and a little water, then bake it into a smooth custard, and somehow, against all logic, it didn't taste like vinegar at all. It came out tasting shockingly close to lemon meringue. sweet and tart and totally convincing, which is exactly why folks nicknamed it poor man's lemon pie. This one dates back to the 1800s, and it lived in the same hard times family as the water pie, the kind of recipe people called a desperation pie. But the clever part is the chemistry. Your tongue can't always tell one acid from another once you bury it in enough sugar, so a single spoonful of vinegar could stand in for a whole bowl of fruit nobody could afford. It was a flavor magic trick built out of pure need. But faking a dessert is one thing. Faking the honey for your morning toast is a whole other level, and somebody actually cracked it. Sitting at number 7 is corn cob jelly. This might be the most waste-nothing recipe on the entire list. After a family finished eating corn off the cob, most people would toss those bare, stripped cobs straight to the pigs or into the fire. But poor farming families back in the late 1800s looked at that pile of garbage and saw breakfast. They'd take those naked cobs, boil them in a big pot of water, and that water slowly turned into a sweet, golden, corn-flavored stock. Then they'd strain it, stir in sugar and a little lemon, and cook it down until it set into a jelly the color of warm honey. And if they used cobs from red field corn, the jelly came out a rosy shade that looked almost exactly like apple jelly instead. Plenty of folks straight up called it mock honey and spread it on their bread like the real thing. But there's a hidden problem almost nobody mentions. Corn has nothing in it that naturally turns liquid into jelly, no pectin at all. So before store-bought pectin showed up around 1930, that mixture often set more like a loose syrup than a firm spread. That's actually why the honey nickname stuck so hard, because runny and golden is exactly how honey looks anyway. They turned actual garbage into something sweet enough to fool a hungry kid. Now, everything so far has been broke families faking sweets. But the next one flips the whole script, because this time they were faking meat. And the reason behind it is going to mess with your head. Now it turns to meat with number 6, city chicken. Get ready, because this is the one that breaks people's brains. City chicken is a little fried thing shaped like a drumstick, golden and crispy, served up on a wooden skewer with gravy and mashed potatoes. But there's no chicken in it, not a single bite. It's actually cubes of cheap pork, sometimes veal, breaded and shaped to look just like a chicken leg. And now for the part that sounds totally backwards today. Back in the early 1900s and through the Depression, chicken was the expensive meat, way pricier than pork or veal. Yeah, you heard that right. Chicken was basically a rich person's food because raising birds took grain and effort, and farmers mostly kept their hens alive for eggs, only eating them once the birds got too old to lay. Pork and veal, on the other hand, were dirt cheap in crowded city neighborhoods, especially up in the Rust Belt, where Polish and Ukrainian families packed into places like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit. So those families grabbed the cheap scraps they could afford, jammed them on a stick, fried them golden, and pretended they were eating the fancy bird they couldn't. That's exactly where the name came from. It was chicken for city folks who had no chicken. And the dish never fully died, because grocery stores around Cleveland and Pittsburgh still sell those pre-cubed meat skewers labeled city chicken to this very day. But the wildest detail proves just how upside down it all was. Pork was so cheap and common that it later got marketed as the other white meat to compete with chicken, the very thing it once stood in for. That's a clever fake born straight out of being poor. But the next trick wasn't born in America at all. It came from a tiny corner of Wales. From there we crossed the ocean to number 5, the Glamorgan Sausage. out in South Wales, meat was tight for working families, so they came up with a sausage that had no meat in it whatsoever. Instead of pork, a Glamorgan sausage is made from cheese, leeks, and breadcrumbs, all mixed together, rolled into a sausage shape, breaded, and fried until crispy and golden. No casing, no animal, just sharp cheese and onion doing all the work. Everyone assumes this got invented during World War II rationing, when Britain was starving and meat was nearly impossible to get. But that story's wrong. This sausage is way older than the war. A traveler named George Borrow wrote about eating them for breakfast in his 1862 book about wandering through Wales, and he said they were not a whit inferior to the famous sausages of Epping. That's a fancy old way of saying these meatless little things tasted just as good as the real ones. But there's a sad secret buried in the recipe. The original Glamorgan cheese came from a special breed of Welsh cattle that almost completely died out by the 1920s. Then the war forced nearly all of Britain's milk into making plain cheddar, so the old cheese basically vanished forever. The sausage survived, but the very thing that made it special didn't. But fooling people with a cheese sausage is nothing next to what rich folks were faking hundreds of years earlier, and number 4 is honestly disturbing, which drags us way back to number 4, the mock turtle soup. This one's got a dark twist most people never hear. Back in the 1700s, the fanciest, most expensive dish in all of England was green turtle soup. Rich lords were obsessed with it. They shipped as many as 15,000 live sea turtles all the way from the Caribbean just to slurp this stuff at giant banquets. And they nearly wiped the green turtle off the planet doing it. The soup got so rare and so pricey that regular people had no shot at ever tasting it. So clever cooks built a copycat using the cheapest thing they could find. An entire calf's head, skin, brains, organs and all, boiled down for hours until it turned thick and jiggly, almost exactly like real turtle meat. The legendary cook Hannah Glass was printing instructions on how to fake it as far back as 1751. But the part that'll really stick with you is where this fake soup ended up. You know the mock turtle character from Alice in Wonderland? That sad creature with the strange body? The artist drew him on purpose with a calf's head, hooves, and a tail stuck onto a turtle's shell, because that's literally what the soup was made of. It's a recipe hidden inside a children's book, and almost nobody catches it. And this fake stuck around for ages. They served it at the dinner when Abraham Lincoln became president. Campbell's later canned a version that became Andy Warhol's favorite soup, and old labels even warned shoppers to beware of imitations, which is pretty funny for a soup that was already a fake of something else. The real turtle nearly went extinct, but the fake one became a cartoon, and the next fake pulled off that exact same trick with one of the most expensive foods on earth today. Number 3, flipped completely upside down, poor man's lobster. This was a simple trick where families took cheap white fish, usually monkfish or plain cod, and poached it in water loaded with salt and a touch of sugar. Then they drowned it in melted butter. And somehow that humble fish came out sweet and firm and tasting shockingly close to real lobster tail. It let people who could never dream of buying lobster eat like kings for one night. But the history underneath this is almost too good to be true. Because lobster, the food they were so desperate to fake, used to be the cheapest, nastiest food around. We're talking a couple hundred years back, when lobster was so common along the coast that it was treated like garbage fit only for the poor. They fed it to prisoners. They ground it up to feed their crops and bait their fish hooks. There are even stories of servants in New England pushing back against being fed lobster too many times a week, But then the railroads came. Lobster got shipped inland as something brand new and exciting. And suddenly, the garbage food turned into a rich person's prize. So you've got people faking a fancy lobster using cheap fish, when that same lobster was once the poor man's punishment. And these days, monkfish often costs more than lobster anyway, so the whole thing has flipped a third time. But the deepest fakes of all weren't about being broke. They were about religion, and that's where this story turns truly ancient. Faith brings us to number 2, the mock duck. Long before any broke American family was boiling crackers, Buddhist monks in China were pulling off the most advanced fake meat on the entire list, and they were doing it over 1,000 years ago. Their religion told them not to kill animals, but they still missed the taste and the chew of real meat, so they figured out something genius. They took wheat flour, washed away the starch with water, and what was left behind was pure, stretchy gluten, this chewy, springy dough you could flavor and shape to mimic duck, chicken, or pork almost perfectly. You've probably eaten it yourself. Today, we call it seitan, and you'll find it in vegetarian restaurants all over the world. But almost nobody knows the name seitan is brand new. It was only invented in 1961 by a Japanese writer named George Osawa. While the food itself is roughly 1,500 years old, they worked the same magic with tofu too. Way back in the 900s, a Chinese writer recorded that people nicknamed tofu Little Mutton because it was the closest thing to meat a person avoiding meat could eat. This fake got so woven into the culture that, in the classic novel Journey to the West, demons serve the traveling monk human flesh fried to look like wheat gluten, basically a fake of a fake. So while everyone thinks fake meat is some trendy invention sitting in your grocery store, monks perfected it before most of Europe could even read. But the oldest and strangest fakes of all are still coming, and number 1 will completely change how you look at a simple boiled egg. And finally, the wildest of them all, the medieval mock feast. For hundreds of years across Europe, the church banned meat, eggs, and even milk for massive chunks of the calendar. Add up all the fasting days, the Fridays, the long stretch of Lent, and roughly a third of the entire year was off limits for those foods. One rule from Pope Gregory the Great, written all the way back in the year 604, banned meat, milk, cheese, and eggs on fast day, and that single rule stuck around for almost 1,000 years. But people still wanted their normal meals, so medieval cooks became absolute masters of faking it. When they couldn't use milk, they soaked ground almonds in water to make almond milk, then poured it into everything, because almonds didn't count as forbidden. That's right. The trendy almond milk in your coffee shop is basically a medieval way to sneak around a religious rule. But they didn't stop at drinks. To fake the meaty filling of a pie, they chopped up almonds and grapes and diced bread to copy the ground meat and crispy fat inside a real meat pie. And the single most insane fake on this whole list is the mock egg. A cookbook from 1430 explains how to take an empty eggshell, fill it with white almond paste for the egg white, then add a separate ball of almond paste dyed yellow with saffron for the yolk, so you could sit down to a hard-boiled egg during a season when real eggs were completely banned. They rebuilt an egg from scratch out of nuts, and it gets even more ridiculous because monks were so desperate to eat meat on fish only days that they straight up declared certain animals were fish. Barnacle geese got labeled as fish, beavers got labeled as fish, mostly thanks to their scaly tails, so the monks could roast them up and call it a holy meal with a totally straight face. From medieval cooks faking an egg out of almonds to your grandma boiling crackers into apple pie, the lesson never changes. When people run low on money or food, they don't just give up. They get clever, they get sneaky, and they fool everyone at the table, including themselves. And honestly, that's the part that sticks with me. Every single one of these fakes started with somebody refusing to let hard times win. They took scraps and shells and stale crackers and turned them into a real meal that fed a whole family and even put a smile on the table. So if you had fun digging into this forgotten food history, do me a favor and tap that subscribe button.